So it's Paul's first letter to the Thessalonians, chapter 2, and we are reading verses 1 to 12. You know, brothers and sisters, that our visit to you was not without results. We had previously suffered and been treated outrageously in Philippi, as you know, but with the help of our God, we dared to tell you his gospel in the face of strong opposition. For the appeal we make does not spring from error or impure motives, nor are we trying to trick you. On the contrary, we speak as those approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel. We are not trying to please people, but God, who tests our hearts. You know we never used flattery, nor did we put on a mask to cover up greed. God is our witness. We are not looking for praise from people, nor from you or anyone else, even though as apostles of Christ we could have asserted our authority. Instead, we were like young children among you. Just as a nursing mother cares for her children, so we cared for you. Because we loved you so much, we were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our lives as well. Surely you remember, brothers and sisters, our toil and hardship. We work night and day in order not to be a burden to anyone while we preach the gospel of God to you. You are witnesses, and so is God, of how holy, righteous, and blameless we were among you who believe. For you know that we dealt with each of you as a father deals with his own children, encouraging, comforting, and urging you to live lives worthy of God, who calls you into his kingdom and glory.
What do you think makes a good leader? I want you to think to yourself, who are the leaders that I admire, that I think have good qualities as leaders? So maybe shout out a few examples. Any thoughts on, if I say, who's a good leader? Who might you say?
They do what they say.
They do what they say. Yep. Integrity. Yeah. Any other qualities or any other names of people who might actually have these qualities? Nelson Mandela. Desmond Tutu. God. Yes. That, of course, is the correct answer. Yeah, well done. I noticed nobody's mentioned the Archbishop of Canterbury, but maybe we'll talk about him later. But we can think about all the different leaders, maybe political leaders, some of us have mentioned, or leaders in the church. Maybe it's not necessarily famous people, perhaps, that we admire. It might be somebody at work, a really good boss, or a really good teacher at school, or could be a parent or a grandparent or an auntie or an uncle, or maybe somebody who mentored you when you're younger, or maybe still now. Who is the greatest leader? Well, of course, the answer is Jesus, but we're not going to look at him particularly today, although he's always going to be there in the background. But today we're going to be looking at a person who devoted his life to following Jesus and to spreading the word about Jesus. And that is Paul. So today, we're continuing our theme of looking at 1 Thessalonians. So this is one of Paul's earliest letters to to the churches that he established. And we looked at it first last week. Tina was leading us. And we saw that in the first chapter, Paul was encouraging the church. He was saying about everything that the Thessalonian church should be encouraged about, should be proud about, from the way that they have grown and been fruitful since he first established the church. But this week, as we go into chapter 2, he then turns the spotlight onto himself. And he shows how he tries to be a leader, a good leader of the church, and the kind of qualities that he has shown and he thinks are important in the way he has been a leader. And I think this provides for us really good guidance on how to be a good Christian leader. And so that's going to be the focus of my talk today. Now I hear you say, well, Andy, I'm not a leader, so this doesn't apply to me. Well, I will respond to that by saying, in a way, we're all leaders. We all have people who look up to us. We all have people that we have influence on. And even if we don't feel we're a leader now, we will be in the future. So we might as well get these sort of characteristics right now. And the thing is, with being a good leader or a good disciple, it doesn't just happen by accident. Actually, and what we learn from Paul, is it happens about making good choices, particularly in difficult situations. And so we're going to look at some of these different choices that Paul made and that we might think about making as well. And I'll be looking at different examples. I'll be pulling some examples that I think might be relevant for us, but you might think of your own examples as well. And the important thing, these are in many ways quite small, everyday choices that we make. These aren't really necessarily the big things, but the small everyday choices all add up to really making a change to the culture of the church. So the first choice that I think Paul made was to speak the truth or to keep quiet. And we see this in verse 2. We had previously suffered and been treated outrageously in Philippi, as you know, but with the help of our God, we dared to tell you his gospel in the face of strong opposition. So back during the summer, when we looked at some stories from Acts, we learnt about Paul's visit to Philippi, where he was imprisoned. Paul and Silas were imprisoned, but miraculously they were able to escape from prison. And rather than escaping, the jailer woke up to find that the doors had been opened, but they were still there. And as a result, the jailer and his family gave their lives to Jesus. But he got a huge amount of persecution here in Philippi, and that's what he's talking about there. So he was forced to leave the city, and that's when he came to Thessalonica, which is like the next city along the road. But that persecution continued even there. But he didn't stop speaking. But I just think if he had made the choice to think, well, actually, this part of the world is too tough. You know, there's too much opposition here. Everyone is suffering. So I think I'm just going to call it quits as a missionary. I'm going to keep quiet. If he'd have made that decision, then, well, there would be no Thessalonian church at all. In fact, you could argue, would we even be here at all had Paul not taken the choice to continue speaking the truth about Jesus Christ and allowing that church to spread throughout Europe and the people who then followed on from him. The consequences of making that choice were potentially very big. So what kind of choices do we have Well, we have the option to speak the truth or to keep quiet. For example, it might be if you're at work or you're at school or with your friends and somebody says, "Oh, what are you doing this weekend?" You think, well, I don't really want to get a discussion about church and everything, so I'm just going to maybe change the subject or say something a little bit easier. Or they say, "So what is your opinion about this man Jesus? And what's your opinion about the church and about God?" It's too easy for us to just keep quiet in those situations, because we don't want the hassle of getting into a conversation. We don't want the hassle of people disagreeing with us, or people making fun of us, or people accusing us of things, as happened to Paul. So we stay quiet. And as a result, we miss those opportunities to share about ourselves, to share the truth about ourselves and what God has done in our own lives. And then, in a safeguarding context, what if we hear something which doesn't seem quite right? Somebody discloses something. What do we do about this? Do we speak the truth, or do we keep quiet? Keeping quiet can be the easy option. We think, well, I don't want to ruffle any feathers. I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to have to deal with all the admin of safeguarding. Maybe if I just ignore this problem, it'll just go away. Keeping quiet can be the easy option. But as we've seen so many times in the church, it's because people keep quiet or think that somebody else is going to do something that the harms and the hurts and the abuses that happen are able to escalate and aren't dealt with. The second choice that Paul makes, is he going to please God or please people? And this is from verses 4 to 6. So Paul talks about, in verse 5, "You know we never used flattery, nor do we put on a mask to cover up greed." So flattery is a word that means when we try to be nice to people or praise people, but we do it not genuinely. We do it because we want them to like us. Because effectively we like being popular. We like to be respected. We like to be liked. That's a very human way that we are. And so the temptation is in the choices we make, to try and get people to like us, to try and please people. But Paul wasn't bothered by that. He didn't mind if people didn't like him. He didn't mind if people didn't agree with him, because he was only focused on the audience of one, and that was God. The opinion of God of him was all that really mattered. And he talks about this funny phrase about putting on a mask to cover up greed. And putting on masks is something that we often do, is we like to portray ourselves in a certain light amongst certain people, because we want to make ourselves into the sort of people that they want us or expect us to be. And we know we're going to fit in with those people. So Paul didn't want to put on a mask. He wanted to show his own self. And this thing about greed, I'm not quite sure what it means, but I think this might be to do with finances, which we're going on to in the next bit. But essentially, he wasn't going to pretend in order for them to like him and then persuade them to give him money. That wasn't what he was about. He was genuine towards them, and he didn't have ulterior motives. So what does this mean for us? Well, there are probably lots of examples of where we have this choice between pleasing people and pleasing God. One of them is when I'm speaking to myself, standing here, or anybody that's up at this lectern, giving the word of God. Do we focus on telling people what they want to hear, what we think will get nice feedback from the church, or do we focus on preaching what we think God is saying, even though it might offend or it might upset people? So that's a challenge to us as leaders and preachers in the church. Another example I thought of is prayer. Do we find that we focus a lot on how we pray when other people are around, but maybe are a little bit more lax when we're praying on our own? You know, we like to say impressive words when we're with others. You know, we like other people saying amen to our great prayers. And yet, it's nonsense, because we're not praying to other people, we're praying to God. So it should be those silent prayers, those private prayers, and that commitment to prayer on our own, that should be what drives us, not by trying to impress others. So we want to speak the truth. We want to please God. And then the third thing is, are we going to lead out of love or out of power? And this is the last half of this passage, verses 6 to 12. And in verse 7, we have this beautiful image, and we've already alluded to it before with the psalm that Will shared. So Paul says, just as a nursing mother cares for her children, so we cared for you. And I thought, this is a really beautiful image of how Paul saw himself. And when I first read this, I thought, this is a beautiful image. It gave me this vision of a mother with a quiet baby asleep, maybe singing her a lullaby. And it was all very genteel and very nice. And I thought to myself, I've held a newborn baby in my arms before. I'm going to be careful here because he's sitting in the front row. But I've held a newborn baby before, and it's not always like that, is it? They poo and wee at inopportune times. Puking up his milk just as I put on a new shirt. Those nights at 3 a.m. in the morning thinking, why won't this child be quiet and go to sleep? You see, it is easy to love people when they're compliant, when everything's nice and they're very obedient. But as parents, our job is not to love our kids just when they're compliant, just when they're nice, just when everything's going fine, but of course, to love them unconditionally. So as a parent, it's not about having that status as a parent, enjoying bossing around little people and getting them to do as you say. That's not what we go into it for. It's about creating a safe, safe and healthy environment to which they can flourish, even during those tough times when it doesn't seem that they're really learning anything. And Paul's love for the Thessalonians, I think, was very similar to that. He did praise the Thessalonians for being a good church that seemed to be following what he was teaching them. But I'm sure it wasn't always like that. But he didn't give up on them. He kept going, and he approached it with love and gentleness. For him, it wasn't about the power and the status of who he was as one of the senior members of the church. And so mothers get a mention in verse 7, but then also in verse 11 to 12, he talks about fathers as well. So we dealt with each of you as a father deals with his own children, encouraging, comforting, and urging you to live lives worthy of God. So we have here this picture of comforting, putting the arm around the shoulder, but also of urging them to live lives worthy of God. You see, loving people isn't always about being nice to people. We kind of talked to that before about flattery. No, sometimes we need to challenge each other and urge each other to be different, to be better. And that's how we produce flourishing lives in each other. And just one example I thought of about this difference between love and power. And it's a very small thing, but like I said, it's the small things that actually really matter. I was last month at the Diocese Development Day. A few of the other focal ministers were there as well. And we had a keynote speech by a guy called Christian Selvaratnam. I can't pronounce his name. Or Reverend Dr. Christian Selvaratnam. So he had all the titles. So I went to his keynote speech, which was all about discipleship and being an apprentice of Jesus. And then he did this the seminar on developing leaders and preachers. So I went along to that as well. And you know when you go to somewhere and you're the last person to arrive. I got slightly lost in the building. I went up the wrong stairs, and I finally got there. I was the last person to arrive, and the only seats left were the front row. So I ended up sitting on the front row for his talk, and I didn't really say anything or ask any questions or maybe take part in the discussion. But at the end, he came up to me, Christian did, and started chatting and wanted to talk about, and then had the opportunity to chat about what we were doing at the Vine, and he was really interested. And I thought, he could have swanned off to spend time with the bishops and all the important people, but no, he thought, I'm happy to speak to a random person I don't know and show that love and concern to that one person. And I thought, yeah, that's how I think Paul was. That's how I imagine him being. And that's how I want to be as well myself as a leader. So, speak truth and don't keep quiet. Please God, not people. And lead out of love, not power. But what is the end goal of all of this? Where does this take us? Well, we see in verse 12 that Paul, as a leader, has been encouraging, comforting, and urging you to live lives worthy of God, who calls you into his kingdom and glory. So here we have the final destination is Christ's kingdom and glory. Now, a couple of times ago when I preached, this was on 1 Timothy, I was talking about a Christmas carol, once in Royal David City. I said it was a bit theologically suspect, but I managed to, there was an important kind of lesson out there about how it crescendoed from this quiet stable all the way to Christ in his glory at the right hand of God. So I'm going to talk about another Christmas carol today, which I think is also theologically suspect, but I think there's a good point in here. Theologically suspect for the same reason, actually, and that's Away in a Manger, which was one of those, probably the first carol I ever learnt as a child. So I can remember the words off by heart, though I did just double check that I got these lyrics right. But if you think about the very last line in that verse is, and fit us for heaven to live with thee there, was the final line. Now, the problem with that is it gives this impression that, we're off to heaven as we die, somewhere in the sky, whereas the Bible tells us it's much more than that. This is about Jesus coming to earth, making a new heavens and a new earth and a new kingdom. So it's a lot more than what we get in these quaint Christmas carols. But the fact is that are we a good fit for this coming kingdom? And that's the important thing. That are we being shaped to be ready for this kingdom to come? Because it's not supposed to be like a really sudden change. We're waiting for a better world, but it's not a passive waiting where we're just waiting for Jesus to do something. No, we're journeying towards that place. It should almost be a smooth transition into this new way because we're already living in this kingdom way already. So I think that's what Paul is talking about here today. So just 9 days ago, I was actually in a conference with Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury. And I didn't realize at the time that that was actually one of his last engagements before he resigned his position on Tuesday. And as Will alluded to earlier, we may have very mixed feelings about this, and it's a very difficult situation that once again we see this church that we're part of, the Church of England, being in the news for all the wrong reasons. And, ultimately, this is harming the advancement of the gospel in our nation. And of course, in this situation, at the centre of it, there is this one evil man who lived a life of abuse and a complete lack of integrity and morals, which we know about. But it's the people around him, the leaders in senior positions, who I'm sure were really trying to do the right thing. But maybe they were not making all the right choices. And it's that which I think led to the situation we find ourselves in. But don't get me wrong, this is not about pointing the finger. This is not about focusing on the senior people. This is about us. This is about me as a focal minister and the choices that I make. And this is about us as a local church, as we look to disciple each other and shape each other to be ready for the coming kingdom. Amen.